Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Broom Closet Briefing, and I'm your host, Broom. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what went on last week, the things that I said will go on, and we can connect the dots and put the jigsaw puzzle for us together a little bit and to see where we are going, which way we are headed as the nation. And I am not going to hide the fact that we are a nation at this point under extreme duress. And some of us are probably experiencing that the first time in our lifetime. Like I said, mm, my voice is cracking because like I said, guys, disclaimer. I am trying to absorb a lot of this by myself. Um, and the thing is that I do think that some of us are definitely supposed to be here to to witness this moment, document this moment, um, and these moments that are going to be part of the history. And like we constantly talk about in the chat, I do think that the so-called civil war that we a lot of us diviners like astrologers are trying to draw the contrast between what went on 250 years ago versus now, and the transits look incredibly similar. And we have been saying that history kind of rhymes. um, that this is what it is probably going to be designated as the civil war time of the Civil War era, the second Civil War era, in my opinion, um, maybe like 50 years, 60 years from now. Anywho, so I want to talk a little bit about all the things that we are going to look at the bigger picture. And here, I want to say that there are moments when something like happens and the country doesn't absorb it the way it usually does, and then it doesn't slide it into the background, and it doesn't let the news cycle kind of like chew it up and then spit it out. Instead, it kind of just like stops, and you can literally feel like the ball in your chest and in your nervous system, and like everyone collectively like leaned forward at the same time, and then realized like something fundamental had completely shifted. And that's what this week was all about. The the brutal killing execution of Alex Preddy in Minnesota isn't landing like a standalone tragedy. It's landing more like a match being dropped into a room that has been quietly like filling with gas for years. And the reason it feels that way isn't because people suddenly like started to care more. I mean, the Second Amendment people come into my head every time there was a school shooting or something. But it's because this incident is uniquely shocking. It's because this happened after too many other things were already tolerated, and after too many explanations were accepted, and after too many times we were told to doubt what we were seeing with our own eyes. Minnesota, Minneapolis in particular knows this pattern. Like I talked about it in my last episode, is the city has lived through it before and not too long ago. It remembers what it means when the state kind of becomes the violent like state becomes violent in public, and when official statements arrive fully formed before the facts even like catch up, when grief is immediately managed instead of honored. So there is muscle memory there. And when something repeats in the same place, I see the under the same like institutional logic, and it doesn't feel any random anymore. It feels kind of like unfinished. And I know that I talked about it a lot in my last episode. I want to say something clearly before we go any further, because this episode isn't about outrage for its own sake. And this is not about me venting to you or reacting or spiraling in that way. This is about recognizing a structural moment while we are inside it. This isn't just about ICE or border patrol or about one agent, one decision, one encounter. It's more about the system that learned over a long period of time that it could operate inside ambiguity, and that it could rely on confusion as armor, and it could use language, jurisdiction, procedure, and delay to keep itself like insulated from consequences. But I want to tell you, the silver lining is that era is ending. Why I say that? For years, we have lived inside what I can only describe as institutional fog, and everything blurred, right? Just enough that accountability could never quite land. And you were told something happened one way while something suggested the other way. You were told investigations were ongoing while nothing visibly changed. And then you were told like harm was incidental, not systemic. And if you felt unsettled by that, the problem was framed as your inability to understand complexity. This wasn't accidental. It coincided with a broader psychological and political climate where denial became normalized and gaslighting became the governance. And you are going to blame yourself for being in that system. It is astrologically and symbolically, psychologically, however you track cycle, the period aligned with Neptune moving through Pisces. And then Neptune dissolves the clarity, right? And Pisces blurs boundaries. So discernment is our only tool. And a lot of us like who reads the stars well, and they people will come and hound us telling us astrology is not real. Then coincidentally this really maps up to exactly what the stars are saying in the sky is going to happen down as above so below. Then there is no explanation on these people skeptics who would tell us that this is not real. But let them have their day, because people like us who know this, we know that we have to look beyond what is being served to us as a platter as his explanation. These transits together, they created the perfect conditions for the institutions to say one thing and then do another thing while surviving the contradiction. So I would say that was the background of the first Trump administration as well. Not just the authoritarian impulse, but narrative distortion at scale. The insistence that nothing, absolutely nothing you were seeing was quite what you thought it was. The constant pressure to doubt your own perception, but it's all going to change this week. This week, Neptune moves into Aries, and Aries doesn't do fog. Aries is the first contact, impact, confrontation. It's what happens when something stops being theoretical and collides with the body. Neptune in Aries doesn't bring enlightenment, it brings exposure, it brings friction, it brings moments that cannot be explained away because they are too direct, too visible, too physical for that matter. And this is not a spiritual awakening era. Don't get me wrong. This is the impact era. And that's why these deaths are landing differently, because they are not happening inside a narrative cushion anymore. They're happening at the exact moment when the fog burns off. Neptune the fog, Aries the fire, it burns off, and what's underneath is impossible to soften. I've been writing about this arc for months now. I mean, I've been telling you guys for almost like months, like 7, 8 months now. In terror spreads that didn't whisper, they shouted. The spreads that began with tens and ended with tens, cycles closing, institutions reaching the end of their myth, secrets surfacing, evidence accumulating, public reaction igniting, and eventually, always, money becomes the lever that snaps the structure in half. And none of this is abstract to me. because I've seen the system so up close, not at its most violent, but at its most revealing, and sometimes that is worse. In 2020, I was returning to the United States after a 10-day trip in India to Los Angeles after attending my father's funeral. That was a different kind of a grief. I was grieving, I was exhausted from the flight, and I was traveling on advance parole, which is an intermediate step between two legal like statuses. So advance parole is when I'm waiting for my green card to be printed. My green card was already in process, and I had completed my interview and just waiting for my green card to be sent to me in my mail. All my paperwork is in order. There was like nothing that is wrong with my paperwork. It's squeaky clean. It's the probably the most like cleanest immigration process, like with no delay, nothing that I have gone through. This was not even my first time traveling. Maybe first time on advance parole, but not first time traveling in and out of the country either. And I had never had a problem entering or leaving the country before. As you all know, my husband's a US citizen, a veteran, and he went through his line, which is the citizen's line, and I went through mine, which was a non citizen's line. The first CBP officer was nice. She reviewed my documents, told me everything looked fine, and then she said something that if you have ever dealt with this system, you know is the moment that ground shifts. She said, "Let me go talk to someone." I was taken into secondary screening. No explanation, no reason given. My passport and my documents were taken from me. I was not allowed to use my phone. In fact, one of the CBP officer who was looking at me, checking my phone, I was frantically trying to contact my husband who was outside, probably looking for me, doesn't even know where I went, came and actually reprimanded me saying that he will confiscate my phone if he sees me fiddling with my phone next time. I couldn't tell my husband where I was. I couldn't tell him I was safe. I couldn't tell him anything. He had no idea where I was. I sat in a room with other people, all of us suspended in that bureaucratic limbo that doesn't technically call itself detention, but feels exactly like it in the body. Waiting without information, waiting without time, no agency, nothing. And while I waited, there were two television screens mounted in opposite corners of the room. And on both of them, they were playing Trump's first impeachment hearings. Irony, right? I remember staring at those screens and feeling how surreal it was. The state questioning itself on television, accountability being like performed loudly and ceremonially, while in that same moment, in that same building, the state was exercising total control over our bodies without explanation, without transparency, and without any recourse. After 2 hours, I returned my documents and they told me I was free to go. No reason, no apology. It was just routine check, right? I had missed my connection flight. My husband had missed his as well. They handed me a slip of paper and said, "The airline may help us, they may not. It's up to them." They said this would probably keep happening to me until I received my actual green card. That was it. No error, no wrongdoing, no fix. Just a demonstration of, I want to say, power. That experience didn't radicalize me overnight, but it clarified something permanently. The system does not need to be overtly violent to remind you that it has power over you. It only needs to be opaque, calm, procedural, unmoved by your fear or your grief. That's why, like, I don't accept the language anymore. Not routine, not standard procedure, not isolated incident. These phrases exist to keep the fog intact, to keep you doubting yourself instead of questioning the power. And that fog is going away. What we are watching now in Minnesota, in Congress, in the streets, is what happens when institutions lose narrative control before they lose the structural power. This is the most dangerous phase for any system, in my opinion, because it's when the public really stops arguing about what happened and starts asking who will be held accountable. Let's connect this directly to what we have already forecasted, because none of this is surprising if you have been paying attention. So I said when Rene Good was killed, the immediate response for the same script, right? We have seen before. Official statements arrived fast, explanations were all tidy, responsibility was all diffused. But the difference this time was that the cracks showed immediately. The video contradicted the narrative. And the local officials, they refused to fall in line. So federal prosecutors resigned rather than they participating in the cover. And that was this high priestess moment that we talked about, and the secrets surfacing faster than they could be contained. Then we see the page of coins, the evidence, receipts, the documentation that didn't rely on the interpretation. Excuse me. Footage, the medical examiner rulings, paper trails, etc. And the kind of truth that does not need to shout because it's solid. So then the page of ones, public reaction igniting, then the students walking out. We had that, we see that in the Minnesota schools. Businesses closing for the general strike, protests spreading. Not symbolic outrage, but disruptive presence. The moment when silence really loses its grip. And then the Queen of Coins, where grounded leadership steps in, governors, local officials, community figures who understand the machinery of power and know how to apply pressure where it actually hurts. And finally, the tense endings, structural collapse. Not reformed theater, not cosmetic changes, but the slow, deliberate dismantling that happens when an institution can no longer justify its existence as it currently operates. And now we are watching the next phase arrive exactly on schedule. And if you're wondering which readings I'm referring to, they are all linked to this podcast episode for you to go and read it by yourself, including the one that says that the DHS secretary will be ousted, which I predicted the beginning of this year as well. And it shows a very specific moment when that happens. And today, I think we have reached that moment. Because when institutions lose moral legitimacy, the only thing holding them up is money. And money is the one lever Congress knows how to pull quietly and effectively. And we are probably going to see them do that this time. This is why you are hearing talk about these purse strings now, not slogans, not speeches, but budgets, oversight, etc., funding limitations. And that's not performative. That's lethal to unchecked power. And I know we do not want this institution to exist. I mean, abolishing ICE is like probably a center, like a centrist, you know, requirement, but the purse strings would start that process. This is how systems would actually fall, not in dramatic coup or but in appropriations meetings, in closed door negotiations, and in the moment when defending an agency becomes more politically expensive than dismantling it. That's what I think. The reason this moment feels so volatile is because pressure is coming from all sides at once, from the streets, from the courts, from the state governments, from labor organizations. We saw that in Minnesota, from people who don't normally align, finding themselves in agreement that something has gone too far. And once that happens, the center does not hold. Neptune in Aries doesn't let institutions hide behind complexity anymore. It doesn't allow harm to be abstract. It forces everything into direct contact. And direct contact always produces friction like heat, fire. This isn't the cycle of minor reform, and this is a reckoning, a crucible, a moment when unfinished businesses come back to demand completion. Minneapolis lit the fuse, but this isn't staying there. What comes next won't be clean or comfortable. I want to warn you guys, but it will be real. And once reality starts moving faster than the narrative, power has to adapt or it breaks. That's where we are now at this point. So the readings that I am actually referring to, these are all linked to this episode. Please go take a look. And you can see that what we have already predicted and what is already on course. It was a very heavy week. I don't think I handled it very well the whole time, and I was kind of a little surprised myself. I come from a different country which has a very different political, like ambience, environment, and I won't be totally honest if I tell you that that I have never experienced this. That is not true. I have experienced situations, or I have not, or at least have been there where things like this has happened before. But like I said, when we come from a country say for example India, and then India looks a lot westward, like they aspire to be like a country like United States. I mean, at least it was when I was growing up back in 90s. Inspiration from the West. This hits very differently. So when we say that the revolution that is here, what are we even revolting against? This is what it is, right? This is the power is when it starts to completely burn everything around you. This is what you're revolting against. I do want to say that it was very heavy week, but there were a few light, like a streak of lights around us that I always want to give you. So before I close this episode, I want to widen the frame just a little bit, not to distract from the Minnesota, but to show you why this moment isn't really isolated, and why it doesn't stay contained inside one agency or one city or one tragedy. Because while all of this is unfolding, while people are in the streets, while ICE and Border Patrol are under scrutiny, while officials are backpedaling on statements they were confident about just days ago. Look at what else is breaking across the country. So, the fact that Trump just backed down on Greenland quietly, tariff threats all gone, not because he suddenly became cooperative, but because NATO completely boxed him in with a future Arctic deal. Nobody knows what that deal is. That's not diplomacy as strength, that's pressure. That's posturing collapsing when reality really pushes back. The Fed's main inflation gauge is sitting at 2.8% at this point, so which is edging further away from the target. And that's not just an economic data point, that's the narrative of control slipping. And you can insist things are working all you want, but numbers don't care about your narrative or messaging. We look at the judge declining to sign off on charges against Don Lemon, the journalist. Look at a Trump appointed prosecutor who aggressively pursued indictments against the president's enemies. Talking about Lindsay Halligan, and she had to quietly leave her post. That's not coincidence. This is institutional discomfort. That's the system flinching in public. Look, the Trump administration also dropping its court appeal blocking anti DEI efforts against universities and K 12 schools, not because the fight was won, but because the ground underneath is completely shifting. Some battles are no longer strategically defensible. The Supreme Court arguments that effectively shielded Fed Governor Lisa Cook from being fired, and that's a boundary being enforced, right? A reminder that power still has constraints even when it pretends it doesn't. Then, about redistricting, let's talk about that. Maryland now moving towards an 8-0 congressional map. New York courts now striking down a map that could hand Democrats another seat, and representation itself is being recalibrated state by state, map by map, under pressure that hasn't settled yet. And then we look at Minnesota. JD Vance quietly walking back the claim that ICE actually has absolute immunity. That's hilarious. That sentence didn't survive contact with reality. And I keep telling you guys that he barely even means what he says. Like, anything, like for that matter, because it couldn't. Because once people are dead in the street and cameras are rolling, absolute immunity stops sounding like authority and starts sounding like a confession. So none of these headlines on their own are the story. Together, I would say they are a story. And they tell you that we are in a moment where power is being forced to retreat in small, unglamorous ways: walkbacks, withdrawals, dropped appeals, quiet exits, judges saying no, courts are stepping in, money becoming conditional, language being softened after the fact. This is what it looks like when the fog starts to burn off. Not one dramatic collapse. Do not expect that. That will never happen. It will be a little by little, but a thousand small reversals, a thousand pressure points lighting up at once. And that's why what's happening with ICE matters beyond ICE. Because once an institution loses the narrative control, everything connected to it becomes unstable, like completely unstable, like funding, authority, public trust, political cover, all. This is not the end of the story, but this is the moment the story stops being managed. And once that happens, the only thing left is consequence. And that's where we are now. Thank you, everyone, for listening to me. I know I sound like a mess. My voice is not where it should be today, but I wanted to get it out. And tell you that we are on the right course. We are on the course that I already predicted. The readings are linked to this podcast episode. Please go check it out if you haven't. I am um, I am an independent creator. I go by my pen name Broom. This is the Broom Closet Briefing podcast, and I will be found on Substack. And I have a private Patreon where I teach. Um, Tarot, Lenormand, cartomancy, and chaos magic, which is what I practice. And if you are interested, join me there. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Remember, don't be a doomer, be a broomer. All right. Thank you.